1 Peter 1:18, this is God's word as it comes to us via Peter. For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life or the futility of life or the meaninglessness of life handed down to your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. So this morning I've called this sermon Fighting Boredom, a theology of boredom for the ordinary person. I was speaking to my friend Jamie, my Christian friend Jamie, the other day. We were in a coffee shop. I'm often in a coffee shop. And I asked him what friends ask each other. I asked him, hey, Jamie, how's it going? And Jamie replied, it's just the same old, same old. I'm bored. My job, my wife, my friends, I'm just so bored. That even golf bores me. I'm bored to death. Those were his exact words. I'm bored to death. And then afterwards, sort of reflecting on the conversation, I started thinking about boredom. And I thought to myself, I've never really heard a sermon on boredom. I've never read anything on boredom. It seems such a critical issue, kind of the elephant in the room. So I started doodling and I started writing some stuff, and I thought I must preach on it. Therefore, I sort of penned this message, this sermon, and those guys that were yesterday, you will see the theological connections. You'll see the structure of yesterday come out this morning, I hope. So perhaps you can identify with Jamie's rant, his venting. I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored. With my house, my kids, my job, my gadgets, my toys, my friends, my food, my clothes. Netflix bores me. I'm bored with myself. I'm bored with my own voice. And I'm bored with church. Truth be told, worship actually doesn't excite me. In fact, sometimes I find the Bible boring. I've even fallen asleep while reading the Bible. Boredom is written large across my life. I think it could be said that boredom is the malady of our age. It has reached epidemic proportions. Let's not pretend that we live in a spiritual bubble and we are immune to this all. I'm so bored, say our children. What do they mean? They don't mean there's nothing to do. There's plenty to do. What they mean is there's nothing that really interests me. We may be bored with lots of things to do. We're bored, but their chores, their deadlines, their responsibilities, their appointments. We go to the gym, we have weekends away, we come back and we're still bored. The kids visit, and the grandkids visit, and that's lekker. That sort of hypes us up for a while. We enjoy that, but then they go again. The World Cup has hyped things up in South Africa. Soon it's over. We hope it isn't over tonight. But it will be over in a week or two. And then it's kind of like normal again. Monday morning, a lot of you jump out of bed. Probably not all the height of excitement. And you have this dreariness about you. Oh no, here we go. Jump on the wheel like a hamster. And there we go. Here's the paradox. The paradox is we've never had access to so many things to keep us stimulated and interested. We've got now more recreation, more amusement, more information, more to watch, more to do. than any other time in human history. And at this exact time, we have never known levels of boredom like we know now. Netflix. I confess, I do have Netflix. Netflix offered a purpose statement for their entertainment mogul, that giant industry that is now Netflix. Mr. Reed Hastings, their CEO, says this: fundamentally, we are about eliminating loneliness and boredom. So they're the boredom beaters, except they're not. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. In fact, Netflix, by the way, are suffering loss at the moment. People are unsubscribing left, right, and center. Okay, so why boredom? Why are we so bored? And men, you'll sort of see parallels with yesterday. In the beginning, Genesis 1:1, there was no boredom. Everything is good. God, in his sovereign, gracious purposes, creates a fantastic universe, which is the very opposite of boring. It comes out of his mind. What comes out of his mind and his creation is not boring. He creates us in the image of God. Adam and Eve, there's nothing mundane or boring about life in the garden. They are thrilled with each other. They're thrilled with their relationship with the Lord. They're thrilled with everything in the garden. It's just pure satisfaction 24/7. There was no vocab in Genesis 1 and 2 with words such as boring or futility. There was not the tiniest blimp of boredom. There was no existential angst. Those ideas were utterly unthinkable. Not once did Eve say to Adam, I'm in a bit of a rut. I think we must go away next weekend. Nothing like that. Not once did Mrs. Eve say, I think I need a new outfit just to make me feel a bit better. I'm bored with my wardrobe. Well, what happened? Well, what happened goes right back to the garden. Adam and Eve rebel. They shake their fist at God. We're not going to live under your rule. We're going to live under our rule. Not thy kingdom come, but our kingdom come. They sin. That's the bottom line. They sin. They cross a line and they sin. And that messes up, that destroys everything. God, we don't want your rule. We are going to self-rule. So here's kind of like one of the major points. At the center of our boredom is the preoccupation with ourselves. At the very center of it is the preoccupation we have with ourselves. We were not meant to be so self-absorbed. We were not meant to be inward-looking. Okay? We were not meant to be like this. We were meant to be like that. Joan Armour Trading, I'm sure some of you remember her. One of her biggest hits, perhaps her biggest hit ever, was Me, Myself, I. Do you remember that? Me, myself, I. Well, that's the spirit of the age. And that is modeled to us. It's modeled to us by culture, society, and the media in all kinds of ways. And the problem is it's not only modeled to us, but we have the internal disposition that accepts it. It's called sin. So our default setting is actually to accept that stuff. Listen to some of the big words that are bandied about today. Self-fulfillment, self-actualization, self-love, self-pity. So being self-absorbed is a guaranteed recipe for boredom. We were not created to be self-centered. Now, of course, none of us say we're self-centered. That's an horrific thing to say. But we are self-centered. The definitive icon of our time is this thing called the selfie. That's the cultural artifact that rules. Look at me. This is my pick. I take myself so seriously that I got 700 of these on my cell phone gallery. We actually weren't made to admire ourselves. That's a recipe for trouble. Who are the most boring people? That is an exceptionally dangerous question, because we'll probably implicate ourselves. But here's the bottom line. I'm convinced that the most boring people are those who talk about themselves all the time. They make it all about themselves. It's about their desires, their wants, their families, their jobs. But let's be careful. Let's not nail ourselves. An infallible recipe for boredom. Make it all about yourself. So there's rebellion in the garden, and there is the fall. And it's not just a personal Adam and Eve fall, it's a cosmic fall. Listen to the Apostle Paul, Romans 8:20. For the creation was subject to frustration. The creation was subject to frustration, as in the pains of childbirth right up to now. Or Romans 8:22. We know that the whole creation has been groaning. The whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth. Frustration and groaning woven into the fabric of our life, woven into the fabric of our experience, and boredom is a byproduct. But you say, well, I'm not so sure about that stuff. Wouldn't I be much less bored if my life was more interesting? Can't I fix this whole thing by making my life more interesting? Well, I think you're wrong. Let's consider King Solomon for a moment. He wrote this book called Ecclesiastes, which is one of the most outrageous pieces of literature ever penned. I hope you've read Ecclesiastes recently. How do we describe Solomon? Well, here's how I would describe Solomon. Imagine Elon Musk or Richard Branson, okay? But imagine, if you can, a godly Elon Musk or a godly Richard Branson. In other words, not a cowboy, not a lunatic, not a playboy, but a godly man with all the resources, all the opportunities of a Elon Musk or a Richard Branson. So you would say, well, that guy would have the life that is the very opposite of boring, because there's so much experience, there's so much he's got access to. And you look at Solomon, you look at his life. Let me just give you some of what he achieved and some of the terribly interesting things he had access to. He's the top academic in Jerusalem. Jerusalem University, he's kind of like one of the professors. He's a pleasure junkie of note. He's self-indulgent. He throws the best parties with the most fantastic music in Jerusalem. It's all there in Ecclesiastes. All the A-list celebrities visit his home. He's got the most exotic booze, up-to-date booze you can imagine. He's an entrepreneur par excellence. He started building projects and all kinds of manufacturing like you can't imagine. He's got the most spectacular home in the ancient world. He's got obviously an obscene amount of money. He's traveled. He's got women. He's got 1,000 of them. Concubines plus wives, 300 plus 700 equals 1,000. Yeah. And they say he was wise. I don't know. Imagine Father's Day in Jerusalem. I don't know. but he wasn't a playboy kind of guy. Having said all that, he thought about things. And then he writes his memoirs, and his opening salvo is meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. I've been there, done there, got the T-shirt. And he uses that word meaningless 33 times in his memoirs. Now, was he just depressed? No. No, he wasn't. Okay, let's move on. Point number 2. The gospel invades our boredom. The passage we read from 1 Peter. For you know that it was not with perishable things, such as silver or gold, that you were redeemed from the empty way of life, or the futility of life, or the meaninglessness of life, handed down to you from your forefathers, but with the precious blood of Christ. Peter speaks there of redemption from an empty way of life. Now let's for a moment consider the very center of our faith. Let's take away, there's lots and lots and lots of important stuff, and we mustn't ignore all of that. But let's go straight to the very heart of it all. And what do we see? We see God's Son on the cross, butchered and broken, redeeming his people by his blood. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was walking on the beach with my dogs. About 400 meters in front of me, I saw a real commotion. There were people and stuff was happening, and I couldn't quite make it out. And then I got closer. I saw these guys are wearing like uniforms. They're wearing strange garb. And they were singing and they were chanting. And then I saw something horrific. It totally freaked me out. There was a goat almost in the waves. Then I sort of stood and looked, and I realized what's going to happen. These guys are going to slaughter a goat on the beach in public. And everything within it was like a visceral reaction. Everything in me said, this is so wrong. This can't happen here. There are kids around. This is so wrong. This should never, ever be happening. It horrified me. I turned around and I walked away. I was thinking, goodness, man, sure, this is even illegal. And then I thought of Jesus Christ, not of a goat on a beach, but I thought of the Son of God butchered on the cross. A goat just totally made me so uncomfortable. It sent shivers down my spine. It was just a goat. And I think that the Son of God on the cross for you and I. We sang those words, behold a man upon a cross, my sin upon his shoulders. How can we compare a goat to that? If a goat would freak us out, imagine the Son of God for you. So the gospel invades our boredom and our futility. Let me just run through a couple of high points concerning the gospel message. Jesus is not boring. Jesus has been called many things, but one thing you can't call him is boring. He's been called mad, bad, demon-possessed. But Jesus is the most known human figure of all time. He's the most quoted human figure of all time, by miles and miles. Just looking at him in a rational sense, the one thing you can never ever say about Jesus is that he's boring. And then I would say that the gospel is not boring. Of all the things you may call it, one thing you can never call it is boring. The life and death of Jesus is not boring. The resurrection is certainly not boring. The resurrection is either the greatest hoax foisted upon the minds of people. It's either the greatest con job of all time, or it's true. There are no other alternatives. The Jews called the gospel weak and feeble. The Greeks called it just plain dumb. It's stupid. People were not imprisoned, crucified upside down, and thrown to the lions because the gospel is a nice idea. It just doesn't fit. And then the Bible could never be called dull. The Bible is by far the most controversial book of all time. It's been banned. It's been attacked for 2 millennia. And then, there's nothing mundane about the life which Christ has called us to. Jesus does not call us to live a nice sort of middle-class life, some kind of spiritual straitjacket. Jesus said, Mark 8:34, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. There's nothing average or actually decent about that. It's revolutionary. Take up your cross. In other words, you're going to die and follow me. Death and glory. That's the path we walk. Death and glory. There's nothing flat about a person coming to Christ. Having one person understanding the gospel is miraculous. The God who said right at the beginning, let there be light, the God who commanded physical light, has come your way and said, let there be light. In a person's heart, He's switched on the lights. It's a recreation. There's nothing ordinary about that. There's nothing ordinary or lame or flat about the Christian confession. Jesus is Lord. That's the first confession, first Christian confession. When we say Jesus is Lord, it's a rejection of all other systems, all other powers, all other kingdoms, all other people, all other philosophies. It's a rejection of the claims of all others. When we say Jesus is Lord, it's the language of subversion. It's the language of war. It's the language of allegiance. So as Christians, we do need to fight against familiarity. Point number 3, hang in there. I hope you're not bored. And this is perhaps a bit more pastoral and perhaps a bit more helpful. Point number 3. We live between two realities. Reality number 1 is that everything seems ordinary. Our lives seem ordinary. And we need to accept that and appreciate it. Now, I'm not saying this so that you get cynical or despairing. I say this as a positive thing. This is not about surrendering to boredom or futility. This is saying our lives seem ordinary. Our jobs seem ordinary. Our chores, our responsibility, our kids, our routines are ordinary. We're not going to get discovered on idols. We're not going to become instant sort of cryptocurrency millionaires. You're not going to be the next Elon Musk. You're not going to have some YouTube channel or your own sexy cooking channel. I mean, who would want that stuff anyway? You're not going to be the next J.K. Rowling. There's every likelihood that your next 24 hours will be like your last 24 hours. I'm not saying that as a cynic. I'm saying that as a good thing. There's every likelihood, we pray, that you'll be sitting where you are in a week's time. And that's a good thing. What I'm saying is that so-called ordinariness and routine are woven into our lives. The repetition cannot be avoided. Following Jesus sometimes might seem very ordinary. In the words of one writer, following Jesus is a long obedience in the same direction. Long obedience, same direction. So sometimes it seems tedious. It's a comrade's marathon. It's fussbait. There's not a thrill at every kilometer. It's not like that. And if someone's told you that, they lie to you. Pitching up at church is not always earth-shattering, is it? Seeing the same sheep week in and week out is not always fantastic. Listening to the same conversation sometimes drives you up the wall. You're not going to find one spiritual key to the Christian life, which is going to like fix everything up immediately. No such thing exists. You're not going to unearth some sublime truth from the Bible that no one has ever seen before. If you did that, I'm guaranteed it would be heresy. And you're going to be discouraged sometimes by other people. They're half-baked, they let you down. And you're going to be discouraged by yourself sometimes. You're going to carry on battling with yourself. So that's the sort of one pole. The second pole is that nothing is ordinary. Everything seems ordinary. Pole number 2, or reality number 2, is nothing is ordinary. There's something great and glorious about serving Jesus Christ, others in the church. Having the Spirit, having God's Spirit with us, is not mundane. Doing regular ministry week in and week out is not ordinary. In fact, there's something heroic about it. There's something glorious about it. If you're doing ministry that's anonymous, that is not even observed or seen, that draws no attention to yourself, there's something glorious about that. The gospel story is often about now it's a hidden glory. It's a seed under the soil. There's a hiddenness about it. There's something glorious about following Jesus. But the glory goes to Him. Preaching is not ordinary. Chatting to other Christians, counseling other Christians is not ordinary. Helping one another in the church, like we heard this morning, is not ordinary. And then, remember the bigger things, or the bigger world, should I say. The cross of Jesus Christ is cosmic. Colossians 1:19 and 20. For God was pleased to have all His fullness dwell in Him. God was pleased, the fullness of the Godhead in Jesus Christ, and through Him to reconcile to Himself all things, whether things on earth, things in heaven. You see, Christ redeems everything. Not just like the spiritual compartment of our lives. King Jesus has broken into this age of futility and has changed everything. So one very old reformer, in fact he was the president of the Netherlands, Abraham Kuyper, said this: there is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine. So boredom is all about ourselves. It's all about groping in the smog of self. And when we're groping in the smog of self, going up and down Facebook, scrolling on Twitter all the time, and we're admiring our selfies all the time, that is one sure way to dull yourselves to the glory of God, yes, supremely in the gospel, but in everything around us. There's nothing ordinary about loving your spouse. There's nothing ordinary about bringing up your children, nurturing them in the ways of the Lord. Sometimes, of course, it's hard work, it's frustrating, and we lose our joy and they drive us around the bend. But there's nothing ordinary about that. There's nothing ordinary about enjoying a walk on the beach. There's nothing ordinary about enjoying a great concert. Where does the skill come from? Where does the music come from? Where does the ear come from? One person said there are no ordinary people either. The people you rub shoulders with at the mall, there's no one ordinary. Created in the image of God, there's no one ordinary. In fact, sometimes the most straight-laced people, quite frankly, if you knew their story, you'd find them the weirdest. Okay, let me fast forward. Final point. Boredom extends a warning, and it also extends an invitation. The warning is this. Perhaps we should see boredom as a kind of light on our dashboard, our motor car dashboard indicator. You know those lights? They go and they flash and they ping. So the red light is flashing on your dashboard, flashing, and it's pinging. And it's saying there's something wrong with your vehicle. Something is wrong. Well, you could ignore it, and you'll probably have bad consequences. Or you could take note of it. The point is that mismanaged boredom can have devastating consequences. Boredom is often what fuels an adulterous affair. I'm so bored. Which is, of course, midlife crisis. Boredom is what makes us make impulsive decisions. It's what makes people invest in crazy get-rich schemes. Boredom is often what seeks Christians to seek spiritual experiences which, quite frankly, are just not kosher, irresponsible, unbiblical. Boredom. It's what makes us get into debt. And much more seriously, boredom is what fuels spiritual drift. And worse, in fact, it causes apostasy and a complete falling away. So what I suggest to you, it's not one minor sort of ailment. We're not talking about a little thing here. We're talking something about it's potentially very dangerous. Spiritually, it's pathological. You're bored to death? Well, pass up. Be careful. The dashboard lights are flashing and they're pinging. And secondly, boredom extends to us an invitation, a gracious invitation. Now, when I prepped this talk, I looked at I listened to a couple of the TED Talks. Do you know TED Talks? They're interesting talks on this channel, TED Talks. Sometimes they're very good, sometimes they're very bad. But what I really was surprised by was two of the titles of the TED Talks on boredom. I would not have thought this. The one title was, you can go check this yourself if you like, the one title was, Why Boredom is the Superpower of the 21st Century. Now, would you have thought that secular people were saying that? Boredom, the superpower of the 21st century. Another one was the beauty of boredom. In other words, they're actually putting a positive spin on. And there's a sense we can as well. Because we should think of boredom as God's gracious invitation saying to us, something is wrong, something is wrong, something is wrong. There is much better available to you. Turn, repent. Get out of yourselves. Stop taking yourself so seriously. Life does not actually revolve around yourself. Take your focus off yourself. Focus on Christ. Focus on the magnificence of the gospel story. Focus about the Son of God on the cross. Dwell on that. Pray that the Holy Spirit again might come and quicken you, give you a tender heart, and go out and enjoy the magnificence of Christ's world. Enjoy it. It's a grand invitation to enjoy the world over which He reigns. And then there's the beauty of what is still to come. One thing that could never be said about heaven is that it's boring. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2 verse 9, I don't have the capacity to describe what is coming. He says, your mind I can't get my mind around it. My ears can't handle it. I can't describe it. My eyes can't see it properly. It's going to be sensory, spiritual, physical overload. So, my last paragraph, I promise you. Where does that leave us? Well, this is where it leaves us. I'm a plodder, and you're a plodder. But we're not plodders anonymous. We are plodders victorious. Okay? And there is something glorious about plodding. There's something heroic about plodding. And the glory goes to Christ. Galatians 2:20, I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. Christ lives in me. Get your mind around that. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Now that should send shivers down your body. That is like just something else. God is not boring. If God had to appear here this morning, the true and the living God, he would wipe us out. I don't mean in judgment, I mean the mere appearance of his glory. God is not a cosmic killjoy. What is your calling? What is your responsibility this coming week? To glorify God and enjoy him and his good gifts forever. So I trust that's an encouragement to you. I trust it helps you. And I trust perhaps you can share some of the main ideas with your friends. Because for sure, in the days to come, you will meet people who vent in different ways about their boring, average lives. So may God help us all.